9th. Go.
All right, today is March 9th in beautiful, wonderful West Michigan. Today we're going to try to make a video about the rig that I use to make biochar. So what we're looking at here is a pit within a pit. The outside pit is approximately 8 feet by about 12, and inside of that pit is another pit about 3 feet by 8. Now this pit actually has a little bit of depth, so here's our little stake. So we're more than a foot, probably about 15-16 inches. So what's supposed to happen here is we're going to set this pile off, which is composed of mostly dry material, with some of the driest being on the bottom, being dead pine twigs, dead spruce branches, dead pieces of autumn olive. So hopefully after I fire this thing off, it's going to get hot enough to where I'm going to be able to feed some of this random brush that's laying around into the fire and have it go right up with no problem. So once this burns, of course it's going to shrink down quite a bit. So the goal is to try to get the level of the coals to the same level as the first level of the outside pit. Then when that happens, I will cover it with these pieces of sheet metal to seal it in and stop the oxygen from getting to the coals. At that point, I will be out of oxidation, which is a regular fire, and into pyrolysis, which is how you produce charcoal. Charcoal is produced by heating up your organic material in the absence of oxygen. So I've got 4 sheets like this. They will cover the entire bottom area. And then in order to complete the seal, I will take regular subsoil and put it along all the edges and along the seams between the pieces of sheet metal. Now, some people might say, well, you can stop the process by quenching it, which you could do, but pyrolysis will continue after the fire is sealed and keep generating charcoal out of cellulose and lignin. So if you quench it, you're stopping the process prematurely and you're not really letting your charcoal finish off. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So at this point in time, I'm going to gather up more brush, try to get everything staged around here so that when I fire this thing off, I'll be able to feed it as fast as what it can eat it, then get it to the level that I want it to be so that I can seal it off. Now, sometimes you may not quite estimate correctly the amount of material that you need to fill this thing, which is why I started off big today. But in those situations in the past, I've topped it off with regular sawdust from the sawmill. So it's been outside, so it's really moist. So this stuff by itself is almost enough to stop the oxidation and to seal it off. And whatever's left of it can either go through pyrolysis itself or sit on top and become part of your end product. So basically you would have charcoal with some sawdust mixed in, which may not quite be exactly what you're trying to get, but the sawdust is not going to hurt the biochar. So there you go. So hopefully take a couple more shots of this thing as a raging fire, then maybe a shot of it as a level bed of red coals, which is what I'm really trying to get to, then a shot of it after I got it sealed off Wish me luck. So now we started our fire, and hopefully if I got the right combination of dry materials, this thing should take off by itself, which it looks like it's going to do. So once this gets going and consumes this whole pile in flame, then I'm going to start feeding it more material and just try to get it to the point where it's at the same level as the bottom of the outside pit. And then I can start covering it. Very good. So right now, we're at the point where the fire has died down. We've got a pretty good pit full of charcoal that's still burning. Now if you look at the top, you can see there's still logs that haven't burnt to completion. And I could make them burn, but as I'm forcing them together to heat them up and get them to burn, I'm losing charcoal now to oxidation. So I'm at a point of diminishing returns. If I had enough time, I could stand here and keep piling on more and more brush and get the thing heaping high, and then let it bring itself back down through the oxidation and production of ash. But I'm trying to make some charcoal here, and this looks like a pretty good start. So now I'm going to stop this process. And the way that I'm going to do that is by smothering it first with moist sawdust and then with sheet metal. So this is how it looks. You didn't film that, did you? So now oxidation has ended, but theoretically pyrolysis is still taking place underneath the sawdust. Now if I leave it the way that it is, eventually it'll heat through and then oxidation will start and the whole thing will smolder like a giant cigarette underground, which we really don't want. So now I'm going to cover it with a sheet metal to make a better seal. Then I'm going to seal around the edges of the sheet metal with soil. So now I'm going to lay down some sheet metal, and one piece probably looks like the other, so we'll cut back to you when I get all 4 of them down. So now we see what it looks like with the sheet metal on top of it. And you can kind of tell that the shape of the pit is determined to a certain extent by the shape of the sheet metal when it's all laid out. I probably could make it a little bit wider, a little bit longer, but I have trouble filling it as it is. So this is good for me now. Let's say I actually really did get it up to level with hot coals and didn't put sawdust down and instead just had the sheet metal. I could have rain barrels over here collecting water and just dump that almost down the hill to quench it. But to take it a step further, let's say somebody wanted to charge their biochar while it was still hot. Let's say you added fertilizer of some type into your quenching water, whether that's like some kind of organic derivative phosphate or some source of calcium or maybe even compost tea. You could add that into the biochar while it's still hot. It seems like as it's being quenched, that water would get down into those pores, the little spaces, the cellular spaces in the charcoal, and boil off and maybe leave some fertilizer residue behind it, maybe leave some humates or whatever you add into it. You might even be able to custom make your own biochar based upon what you put in the quench water. Let's say you're going to a plant that needs a lot of phosphates, add phosphates to your quench water, then when you dump it onto your hot coals and it boils and steams through that, maybe that would charge your charcoal with phosphate more so than other chemicals. I've never heard anybody talk about this. Maybe it's something the people in Amazon were doing, part of the secret that nobody knows yet, or maybe it won't work. Anyway, that's my idea. So what I'm going to do now is seal this thing up with soil on all the seams and the edges. We'll take another shot of that and we'll look in a few days to see if I actually made charcoal. So now, theoretically, the entire combustion chamber is sealed, and some of those big chunky pieces that have not turned to charcoal yet, hopefully some of them will, at least to a certain extent. Hopefully some of the sawdust that went on top will also turn to charcoal. I'm sure that some of it will. I also believe that if a person had really dry sawdust, they could add it to the top of a rig like this and it would go by itself, and you might actually have a better outcome because the sawdust is already ground. You wouldn't have to grind up your charcoal to get it to the right size. It's being made that way at the right size piece. Now if I had a little greenhouse over here instead of just a little lean-to, I'd have sawdust in there and be trying to do that experiment. Someday I'll get to it, but somebody else wants to get to it first and prove it, that's fine. Yeah. So in a couple days, I'm going to dig this back out and show you some pictures of the end product. Hopefully we got some good charcoal down there. I'm hoping maybe cubic yard. All right, it's March 22nd. It's been a little while since I filmed the first part of this video. Today, I'm going to open this thing up and we're going to see whether or not we made biochar. I have a little bit of worries because there's a gap here and I'm afraid air might have got in and it might have kept burning or smoldering underneath all this metal and dirt, but I'm hoping for the best. So right now I'm going to take this thing apart and we're going to find out. So now we've uncovered our charcoal pit, and on top there's a layer of wet sawdust, which is kind of like what I figured. And underneath that sawdust, there's probably going to be some branches that are partially burnt. That's okay too. I have a spot for them. So right now, I'm trying to pull back some of the sawdust and see if we can get a look at some charcoal. So now we've cleared off our top layer of wet sawdust and a couple of the chunky pieces. So hopefully when I stick this shovel down below this level, I'm going to come up with a nice scoop of biochar. Let's see, here's the magic moment. And there we go. Charcoal with a little bit of sawdust mixed in, but that sawdust isn't going to hurt anything. That's what we want right there. Nice clean biochar. Like I said, the chunky stuff, I have a place for it. I could try to reburn it. There's a gully over here where the water flows down when we have our heavier rains. I just throw those pieces down in there and maybe they can kind of clean up the water a little bit before it makes it in the watershed. This is what we want right here. Nice clean charcoal. And one more thing to add about the whole quenching thing. The person took the right kind of nutrients, maybe some kind of organic source phosphate or some humic acid or some compost tea, and mixed that into the water that they use to quench an operation like this, which you could easily do instead of just covering it with soil and with metal. You could quench it and pour that water in while it's still hot. I think it's possible that the charcoal could become infused, at least to a certain extent, with the nutrients that are in the solution. So you can almost make a custom charcoal that has certain nutrients for certain plants to give them an advantage, whether you added phosphorus or potassium or nitrogen or some humates or even some of the micros, whatever you wanted to use. You could actually add it during the quenching process and charge your charcoal that way, theoretically. Anyway, that's how I'm doing it out here in Claybanks.